The Mystery of Roanoke, 8 Facts and 7 Theories, Part 2. If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video. 9. Fact: the search for the lost colony. When White arrived back on Roanoke Island in 1590 and found it deserted, he still had hope for his daughter and granddaughter. The buildings had been taken down, and there were no bodies or remains in the camp. They had not left the Maltese Cross, indicating violence, and had carved the name of an island and tribe they had good relations with on a post. White felt sure that the colonists were, therefore, safe on Croton Island. White started to search the surrounding islands, but shortly into the search the weather turned bad, producing rough seas and high winds. The ship lost 3 anchors during their efforts, and the captain insisted they abandon their efforts for fear that he would lose the remaining one. They returned to England, and White never found out what happened to his family. 10. Theory: they were murdered by hostile Native Americans. While some tribes were very welcoming towards the English and wanted to benefit from good relations with them, others were extremely hostile. This is understandable as the colonists were making claims on their land and resources. The colony who abandoned Roanoke before the 1587 colony had battled with some of these hostile Native American tribes. When they arrived, White did try to form friendly relationships, but only succeeded with the Crotons. It's possible that the settlers could have been murdered or abducted by a native tribe. Although he is not considered a reliable source, John Smith claimed that during his investigation of the disappearance of Chief Powhatan of the Powhatan tribe claimed that he had killed the Roanoke settlers, although there is no evidence to prove this. 11. Fact: the infamous Croton carving. When John White left the colony in December 1587, he instructed them that, if something were to happen to them, they should carve a Maltese cross on a certain tree. This would be left as an indication that they had been moved against their will. When he arrived back in 1590, the houses and fortifications had been taken down. White took this as a sign that the people had taken their time to leave, obviously not under duress, although someone else could also have dismantled the camp other than the colonists. There was no carved cross, only the word Croton carved into a fence post. This was the name of an island just south of Roanoke, home to the Croton tribe who had been friendly with the English settlers. 12. Theory: the colony was killed by the Spanish. A settler named Darby Glenn left the Roanoke expedition when the ship stopped at Puerto Rico to take on new suppliers. He later reported that he had told some Spanish officials that he met there about the location of the Roanoke settlement. The Spanish had their own settlements just down the coast of Florida, and it's likely that the Spanish in the West Indies also knew about the colonists. Earlier in the century, the Spanish were responsible for the massacre of the French inhabitants of Fort Caroline, and also destroyed evidence of another French colony in South Carolina. It is, therefore, conceivable that they murdered the English settlers and dismantled their habitations, although some people argue that the Spaniards were still looking for the failed English colony in 1600. 13. Fact: it took John White 3 years to return. The colonists had no way of knowing when White would return, and it must have been agonizing for them to wait. Of course, there was no way of communicating the way we do now, and they may have even thought that he didn't make it back to England when he didn't return for such a long time. White did make it back to England, but soon afterward the country was attacked by the Spanish Armada, which led to the Anglo-Spanish War. Every able English ship was called to join the fight, leaving White with no means to return to Roanoke. In 1588, he managed to find 2 small boats which he filled with provisions and sailed for the New World, but they were both captured by the Spanish. Finally, White landed back on Roanoke Island on the 18th of August 1590, his granddaughter Virginia Dare's birthday, but found it deserted, with no trace of his granddaughter or anyone else that was left behind. 14th theory, the Lumbee Connection. A popular theory is that something unexpected happened on the island which caused the colonists to split into smaller groups and move. It's believed that they may have been absorbed into one or more of the nearby native tribes, because no single tribe could have taken them all. The members of the Jamestown colony, which was established 17 years after the Lost Colony's disappearance, engaged with the Native Americans hoping to find answers as to what had happened to the men, women, and children of Roanoke Island. These natives told the colonists stories about white settlements they had seen further down the coastline, and reported fair-skinned people with blonde hair dressed as natives. Most historians believe that small pockets of the lost colony were absorbed into a friendly tribe, and with interbreeding assimilated into the tribe. This may be the Lumbee tribe, native to North Carolina, and while no concrete evidence exists to support this, their oral history links them to the lost colonists. 15th fact. They weren't the first people to go missing from Roanoke Island. The 115 colonists who landed on Roanoke Island in July 1587 were on their way to start a new colony, and had stopped at Roanoke Island to check in on the few remaining members of the first established colony. But when they arrived, there was no one and nothing left of the camp, except for one human skeleton. At this point, you would have thought that they would continue on with their voyage, but for reasons unknown, the fleet commander refused to allow the colonists back on board, insisting that they had to re-establish the colony at Roanoke. They were afraid, and rightly so. They were in a strange place, and had no idea what had happened to the people who landed before them. They implored their leader, John White, to return to England and explain what was happening, and return with help. He sailed for England late in 1587.